Although if you're here, you won't need it, but in case you want to share it with anyone.
Florence.
So we're just waiting for Jessica, but welcome everyone. I'm Wendy. If you don't know me, I run the Vancouver Island School of Art.
Hi, Florence. It's Colin.
Hi, nice to meet you.
We're church friends of Jessica.
Oh, great.
Oh,
So you're familiar with her work, probably.
Oh, very. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
all of her work, probably.
Yes, right from the
Social
Very-
work and
Pardon?
parenting work.
pardon?
Social work and parenting work and
Oh yeah,
everything
that
she does.
yeah, that kind of work, partly. Yeah.
Now, has everyone had a chance to look at the slide room gallery to see her
Well-
work that's up there?
I did, but I had trouble navigating it.
You just have to press the arrow button. It's a slideshow. I can give you a demo after, Susan.
Does that mean it's going to be called the slideshow gallery?
Oh, yeah, no. Even though that's what it was named after. Because we used to have a room where we would show images.
Oh, slides. Yes.
But we're going to have a real slide room gallery starting in September
Oh, really? In the new space?
in the new space. Yeah.
Wow.
So we're excited about that.
Yeah. I liked your tour.
Oh, yeah. It's nice. The space is very Montreal-like because it has a balcony
Yeah,
in the back and a patio. You know how
Yeah.
in Montreal duplexes, you always had the front and back balcony.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
You come across so well in your videos, Wendy. In those little
oh,
bits of
thanks. I don't
video.
feel I do that.
Yeah, you've got a great smile. That makes all the difference.
Oh, that's good.
And you're not wearing a mask. That's nice too.
I was wearing them in one of the
Yeah.
videos.
I like Fox. I like those Fox videos.
Yeah, we got him a pink beret from Norway, so he'll be appearing in a video with his beret soon. We've just had some attachment issues. So
Jennifer Fox is this adorable dog that lives with Wendy. I won't say Wendy owns him.
Oh, that's so nice.
hi, Jessica.
Hi, everyone.
Hello,
Hi,
Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
Brenda was trying to get a hold of you to do the Facebook Live.
Yes, I was just fumbling through some things with her. We decided to abandon.
Okay, that's okay. I mean, we are recording it and I'll put the recording on Facebook and I mean on our blog, our Slide Room Gallery website, and I'll also put it on YouTube. That way we can have it for longevity.
Great. Oh, wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you. And I'll put it on my website then as well.
Okay, great. So I've just been entertaining people.
Oh, it's so cool to see my old studio mates. Hi, Susan. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Jessica.
And it's great to see Jacqueline and Jennifer and Colin and Florence and Sandra and Catherine.
Yeah, so that's nice. You know a lot of the people.
Yeah, lots of different communities represented here. It's very meaningful.
Matthew Toot. See right up there, Matthew Toot.
And I think there was 13 people registered. So I think this might be all of it. And there's your daughter.
There's my daughter.
Oh, Leanna.
Oh my God. Oh,
Susan and Mary remember me yawning in the studio.
how old is she?
She's 7.
7.
Wow, 7. Hi, Oleana.
Well,
She's just gonna watch. She's not part of the show.
well, that's nice that she's watching. So I guess we can get started. It sounds like most of you know Jessica. So I'll just give a brief introduction. I do have your bio, but I'm just going to make it a little more personal since I first met Jessica when she came to study at Visa. And right away, I was just impressed at how much she loved to learn and loved reading. It's so exciting to meet a student who loves to read. Like you want to be their friend forever as soon as you discover that. So Jessica, she studied religious studies at McGill, and then she did history and art at the University of Victoria, and she did a BA in that, and then she did a Diploma of Fine Arts at Visa, and then she's going to be starting her master's degree at the University of Victoria starting in September, and that's congratulations on that, and to have a fellowship. And Jessica was just briefly sending me information on what she's studying, and maybe you could give more detail. It sounds really interesting, the idea of the, the Arts and Crafts Guild during the arts and crafts movement, but also in medieval times, and the whole idea of like arts being a place of social activism. So, and then I see in your bio, you were seriously considering applying to the Vancouver School of Theology to pursue ordination. So that's great. And in your bio, you do say in your studying art history in your master's and researching the intersection between theology, art, and activism. And she lives with her husband and 2 children in Saanich. So, and Jessica's teaching, she teaches art history and drawing and courses about being a practicing artist. So she's one of these people that you meet every once in a while that are just a born teacher. So I'm really happy that you've not only studied at Visa, but now you're teaching and your students love you. So without further ado, welcome, and welcome everyone to our first online slide room gallery artist talk.
Yay.
Thank you, Wendy. And I want to say thank you to Natasha, the curator at the Slide Room Gallery, for all of her support getting this show together. She is so reliable. It's just, and she makes a virtue out of reliability. It's really inspiring. So when you watch this, Natasha, I hope you hear that part. And again, it's so cool to see all of you. I've budgeted 30 minutes for a talk here. And I think it'll be a little bit come across probably as a teaser, and I hope it's the beginning of a conversation that we can each follow up on one-on-one or in our communities together. So Wendy, should I share screen?
Yeah, you should share your screen and then show the slides that way.
Okay, so I've pulled together some slides for you today, and I'm going to talk on, it's really fun actually to pull this together after lecturing on art history and drawing, to pull this together and realize it's about me and that I get to speak personally about my inner motivations. So we're gonna see kind of a broad range of things here, but I really appreciate you tracking with me here. Let's see, where is my...
Yeah, while you're getting that, I just wanted to make a comment. One of the things we really like to do at Visa is have the people who teach art history also be practicing artists, so that it's a different kind of approach. And so it's great for when you hear Jessica talk about her work, but also in the context of art history. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been really fun to find this intersection. Life is a kind of amazing. My parents were hobbyist artists, and I studied art history thinking that was kind of the real job version of being an artist. And I'm so grateful that life has thrown me into making art and doing the real thing for the thing itself. So some images. I want to start with this image. It's by John Ruskin. He was the founder of the Neo-Gothic revival in the 1800s, colleague of William Morris and founder of the arts, and who was the founder of the arts and crafts movement. And this is a drawing he did from 1853 called Study of Gneiss Rock. So he loved the Scottish Highlands and loved going out in nature and drawing nature. And this drawing, it's a touchstone for me because it speaks to, I was raised as an evangelical Christian. And I think a lot of this show, Caryatid, is about sifting through our heritage, my heritage, and rather than, I guess I'd set it up against the kind of trend of cancel culture, rather than jettisoning everything that was oppressive, to actually sort through and find out what was good in our heritage, and approach that creatively, that's there for us to play with and use to our benefit, these cultural heritages. So thinking about evangelicalism, especially in North America in the 21st century, can be really thorny. But what I love about this work is that it shows this pantheistic quality to the evangelical worldview. John Ruskin sought God in everything that he looked at, and that is what is animating this drawing. He saw the living creative spirit in this rock, and that's what he sought to convey in his drawing. So I really relate to that. I would flag that as something that I think is precious about my heritage, that I was raised to seek the divine in all things. And I'm starting to understand that as a sort of pantheism, which is possibly ironic because I think that's a really scary word for evangelicals. But anyways, that's a deep foundation in me. John Ruskin also famously traveled to Venice. He was an art critic, and discovering his writing was deeply affirming for me because he has this really expansive way of writing about art and social critique and aesthetics and the good life. It's just he synthesizes so much in his writing that reading The Lamp of Beauty or The Nature of the Gothic isn't just a dry kind of art treatise from the 1800s. It's got this rich river of insight and human connection with the created world, created by God and by man. So his studies in Venice were, you might see already visually some kinship there. I love these watercolor and graphite. Those are my bread and butter. And the way he's playing with the negative space, the way they're incomplete, they are emergent. Even though they're architecture, he allows this emergent quality to exist. And so I really, it leaves a lot of room for the viewer to project into it. And I know that Ruskin wasn't just studying the architecture to gather motifs, although that's absolutely what he was doing to build new buildings in England. He also was listening with that same eye or ear of the heart for something alive that was being communicated through the generations, through the centuries, through the very stones. And he saw Venice as this ideal medieval town where you could kind of hold Venice up against the evils of commercialism that he was so critical of in Victorian society. And he looked to the medieval era for correctives to what he saw as the oppressive kind of capitalism that was emerging in the Victorian era. So one of the reasons he was paying so much attention to the architecture in Venice was the freedom of the workers. He saw that the quality of the art and the freedom of the craftspeople in a society was a spiritual barometer for the spiritual health of a society. And in the Middle Ages, craftspeople were free to do their craft. For instance, these columns, each craftsperson would design their own column and come up with the motifs. The architect might come up with a whole plan, but there was a freedom of expression and a dignity to the work of a craftsperson. There wasn't this assembly line work that would have horrified Ruskin.
Now, Jessica, is this your work you're showing?
This is a John Ruskin, a
Okay,
capital.
it's
Thank you.
okay.
Yeah, so this is a capital 36 of the Ducal Palace in Venice.
Oh, it looks so contemporary. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, they're very loose, and you have that sense that the Impressionists, well, he got in that fight with Whistler over this sort of thing, but that sense that you're experiencing seeing. He's not just recording this and the artist disappears because they're trying to make an objective record of the thing. You have an experience of him synthesizing this as he draws. And that's another element that's really important to me that I've discovered in my art practice, is that drawing is a way of paying attention and listening. And so while John Ruskin got to go on the grand tour and travel and see, this is another Ruskin. Here's another one, St. Mark's Plaza in After a Rain. You can again just see that emergent quality if it's, you don't know if it's kind of coming together or dissolving. And I think I'm getting too far down the art history John Ruskin path and away from my own motivations.
And so all the images you've shown so far are John Ruskin's?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't seen these. So it's really interesting to see how like drippy and expressive they are.
Yeah, yeah. And he's doing these in his travel journals, right, as he goes. So here's one of mine from the show, Caryatid. And this one is a really special one to me because this is, I abandoned the graphite and went straight with wet ink, India ink on wet paper. And so I set myself up to already be quite loose and kind of not able to be precise. And I was wanting to capture this emergent quality that I see in Ruskin's watercolors.
I love the implied space in your piece. You know, how the white, we know it to be a block of, you know, building material, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's marble, without any information, it really stands as a solid structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you know, Jessica, at the same time, it's fluid.
Mhm.
It's amazing. I suppose it's wet on wet. That's what
Yes.
makes it. But even though you can see it's structured and it's made out of solid, you're representing something that is solid. It seems to move against those dark spaces, and I guess and the fluidity is beautiful.
Yes, thank you, Florence. Yeah, I liked the idea of playing with making this actual, you know, architectural support, make that the negative space. This porch, I should say, going back, this little porch of the Caryatids is just this image that jumped out at me from an art history book, you know, years ago. And I've always wanted to spend more time with it. I'm thinking too, I'm teaching art history and having taught 3 years running now this survey of, you know, kind of ancient Greece up into the 20th century. I've been thinking a lot about our classical heritage. And so in the same way that I have in my own life wrestled with my evangelical heritage and decided to take the good from it and leave the bad, I've noticed that we have a lot of wrestling to do with our classical heritage. And one of the things, you know, people still study Plato in university and introduction to philosophy, so it's not completely lost. But I wanted to think more and more about this. And one of the things that I started to learn was that, and doing this kind of long view of Western art history, was noticing that when we go through these neoclassical periods, like in the Renaissance, where they start to look around and dig up and think about what is that deep heritage, we actually, there's an importation of the patriarchal aspects of Greek culture. And so the West has actually gone through, the status of women in the West kind of does this. And the importation, this revived interest in Greek heritage, classical heritage, usually accompanies a decrease in the status of women. So that is just an observation I made, and I haven't, researched it to an academic level, but it's something I've noticed and a thread I started to pull on. That said, there was another string on this image, but that's okay, I'll just go with it. Oh, and then there's this other piece that the ancient Greek culture, well, I'll get into that, but well, let me advance the slide. So the caryatids are columns that are shaped like women. And so it's a fun thought experiment in this show, I thought, too. What if these columns are like portraits of women? And so here's a Ruskin again, and these architectural supports. It brings in this idea that these solid supports somehow have been supporting these institutions. And this is that invisible women's work, the invisible presence. I'm thinking of altar guilds and cathedrals and maids and all of the people that show up and mop the floors or feed the workers, that it was just a thought experiment of what if we start to read these columns as monuments to the presence of women and their contribution to these institutions. Another thing about the drawing aspect is that John Ruskin got to go on this grand tour and visit these places. And I'm working out in the colonies on the far west coast of the wilderness of Canada, far away from this European heritage, and especially making this in COVID. It was interesting to think about drawing as a way to go there. And the work of finding images to work with, I found myself rummaging through people's, vacation shots from on Google to find different angles of that porch of the Caryatids. So that relates here, this image of the Parthenon in Rome, where it's this temple to all the gods that people would make sure to visit on their tour, their grand tour. And this represents, again, this idea of grappling with our classical heritage, and also how only 150 years ago, just a few generations ago, the connection between the classical and Christian heritage in the West was clear, whereas now that seems to be lost or forgotten. Another thing that is really cool, when I started tugging at this thread, a student actually alerted me to this, Jacqueline, and I have to thank her, was that, so if we talk about ancient Greek culture, the culture before classical Greece was the Minoan culture. They were on the island of Crete, and they were a Bronze Age culture from about 3000 BCE to about 1500 BCE. And they were a matrilineal culture. These images show some elite Minoan women. This is a snake goddess, and this is a fresco from a room of a woman gathering saffron. So these are some ancient art images, and what we have learned from Minoan artifacts is that women had a prominent role, at least in the religious life. And it seemed clear that it was a matrilineal culture. And the people that came, and so the development of classical Greece, in particular Athens, was actually a process of colonization of Minoan culture by another population that migrated into the region. And they brought in their patriarchal values. And so when you get into Homer, for instance, who's writing these deep myths, Greek myths down in about 800 BCE, that patriarchal culture is well established, and they're starting to write down the myths, but the myths are from that deeper matrilineal culture. And so there's actually evidence that the Greek culture kind of superimposed itself on this deeper more ancient matrilineal culture. And you can still see that in the mythology. So for instance, in my show, I talked about Athena and this way that she integrates the masculine and feminine principles. But this is like the little cutting edge of my research, personal research right now, to discover that hunch I had that this patriarchal culture comes from ancient Greece. The point in that insight being that patriarchy isn't just how cultures grow. It's, some cultures are and some aren't. And this is something that we can consciously take on or reject. So that was something I was thinking about, to discover that ancient Greece really was a deep matrilineal culture that was colonized is a really exciting affirmation of that thought. Here, in fact, we have Minoans were famous for this bull jumping kind of gymnastic ritual. And so we have some gymnasts here leaping the bull, and you can see they're female. And then this is a figurine of a bull leaper. And this was dismissed as a contemporary fake for the last 100 years. They thought someone made it and were passing it off, but it's actually we're 5,000 years old, and it's of a female gymnast. So people just couldn't believe that women had this position. They had thought it must be a construction of those pesky feminists in the 70s or 80s. So this porch of the Caryatids, here's one with a little bit different style than the rest, but here's the Caryatids. So they're absent, but they're totally present. I mean, they're holding the place up. So that's kind of the thought that I'm running with here.
Is that your work?
This is my work. This is one of the pieces from the show, yes. And so this building is on the Acropolis. It was built in the big classical building program of Pericles and Phidias, and when the Parthenon was built. And so we have here a temple. You can see it's got kind of 3 different elements to the building. And it was dedicated to Athena and Poseidon, who had a battle over who would get to be the patron of Athens. And we know by the name Athens that Athena won that battle. So there's actually in the foreground here, not included in the drawing, is a little olive tree that's supposedly the sacred olive tree that was planted by Athena after that contest. So thinking about these Greek culture, the ruins, thinking about telling my students about the Renaissance and how people started looking around and saying, what are these old rubble piles anyways? What, and we love to challenge ourselves in class and say, what is there in our culture now that is just laying around and is forgotten and is in plain sight that we might pick up and dust off and learn more from? Here's another Ruskin, and again, this idea of the columns being women bearing the structural weight. It's a lovely way to rehabilitate that decorative craft kind of female woman's art kind of problem too, to say columns are wonderfully decorative and they're deeply structurally important, right? And then here we have Michelangelo's The Libyan Sybil from the Sistine Chapel. So here we have in the Renaissance where as I was saying, they started to dust off this heritage and get curious about it again. And this image has always inspired me and beckons me to more research, because here we have in one of the spandrels up in the ceiling, he put these prophets, and a lot of the Old Testament male prophets are balanced by an equal number of these extremely strong female figures called Sibyls, which apparently is a feminine form for prophet. I don't know anything about this. When I look up this image, learn a lot about Michelangelo, but I don't know who the Libyan Sybil is. Who is this ancient female archetype that Michelangelo has included? So I have this interest in kind of looking at art history, and instead of doing the feminist critique and old dead white guy cancel, I'm going to just take what I want from it and say, who is this woman? What can she tell me about the status of women in history and women heroes in history. And so for me, I think just driving over to this, just this morning, I was thinking, I think I know the answer to what is that rubble that's around us that we don't pay attention to, but that's there for us to get curious about and discover our heritage. I actually think that Christianity might actually be in ruins and there for us to look at and mine for new gifts and new affirmations of the human spirit. So this work, Caryatid, has been a lovely thing to go deep, even deeper, to something even more ancient. And right now, well, this is just organically flowing. So I'm just referring now to some of my previous work to set up the continuum. This is a medieval manuscript, a Book of Hours, and it's an Annunciation scene here where angel is appearing to Mary to say, you will have a son. And these images have often of Mary have been interpreted by feminists as she's locked into this room, it's like a bird cage, and she's reduced to a decorative element, that she, she's a child bride. Lots of critiques of the figure of Mary and how it can be used as an oppressive force for women, that she can be a dangerous role model for young women. And I'm in my work, I rehabilitated that in my Sit Like a Sparrow work, where I did these Annunciation scenes where I copied the architecture out and left the woman, the shape of Mary, as negative space. So there's a direct connection to Caryatid with leaving this negative space for the figure. Here, this one's quite whimsical, where the tile pattern comes up to fill that space of Mary at prayer in her gloriette. Let's see if so that's another theme that I'm thinking about when I'm doing this work, and is to to think about a new life-giving, building kind of approach to looking at history, as opposed to, I think the critique that's been happening for the last 30 years has been really important, but it's time to pick the pieces up and start making what we will of them. This last image is Albrecht Durer's master engraving, Melancholia 1, and I included it on a whim as my final image for a catch-all for discussion, because what we have here is a self-portrait of Durer as an artist, probably as an allegory of art, and he's an androgynous figure. He's showing himself as intersexed, an angel, and he is, this is a figure. Melancholy was thought to be like a required temperament of artists since ancient Greece through the Middle Ages. It's that contemplative approach to life. So you see him with the implements of geometry and precision, and you see symbols of the resurrection and the crucifixion, and you even see a little thing for giving yourself an enema, because constipation is a symptom of melancholia. And so Durer has included everything abstract and everything embodied that he can think of for the artist. So I've kind of spoken myself out. If that was less organized than I had planned, but I'd love to open it up now and pass the mic back to Wendy.
Well, Jessica, that was great, so interesting. And I'm really interested in the segue from the work you did when you were doing your Diploma of Fine Arts, the Mary, and then how you took out Mary and then the architecture was left, and now you're continuing with that idea of like architecture representing the human form in different ways, right? And I was wondering, like, it feels like it just was sort of a natural progression from your research, and maybe if you could speak about how that transition happened.
Into the transition into the classical.
Yeah, like the transition from your work, because I think people are really interested in this idea of the continuity of an idea. And, I have a philosophy which, it's not proven, but I feel that people, artists, and even writers have one idea
Mhm.
and they spend their life working on it, but they only realize after towards the end of their life, when they reflect back, that, oh yeah, that was all one idea. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about like the in-between stage that got you to thinking about Ruskin, and just that kind of process. And because it feels like it was a very natural evolution, but I'm sure there were some like so not roadblocks, but some kind of stops and starts.
I think, let me go to an image of my work so I can kind of not be distracted as I'm speaking. Here we go. Yeah, I think it was, the part of me loves the medieval era. I'm a complete romantic about the medieval era, and I would love, part of me, it's funny, I lived in Montreal, and they have a lot of, in the park up there on the mountain, they have, the role playing, all the guys come out people come out in their medieval costume and fight with foam swords, and it's like every Saturday, and I always thought that was the geekiest thing, and now I realize I'm deeply affiliating myself with folks like that. I love the medieval world, and I wish we could recreate it sometime.
Well, it's so progressive in many ways.
Yeah, and so I really have a foot in both worlds, though. I also am a student, devotee, apostle of Marcel Duchamp. And I would say also Zen probably is a bigger influence in my work than I realized, because of its influence in the 20th century in North America. But these ideas that an artist, an artwork is kind of just the residue of an artist spending time in a transcendental state, or that when I think of Zen, I think of the calligraphy tradition, that there's a physicality to that people appreciate when they're viewing Buddhist calligraphy. And so what I'm saying is that I have this deep love for the medieval era, but I am also deeply anchored and value my postmodern identity and all the permissions we get in the postmodern era. And so I intrepidly applied that to Christian subject matter. And because another part of my artwork is that contemplative space, that contemplative practice where drawing is, John Luna nailed it, of course, when he talked about this devotional crawling. I'm kind of crawling across the surface of something with my pencil, and this devotional lingering over it. I'm not trying to make an objective record of this. I'm just using the pencil and the ink as a way to keep spending time in this open-ended thought over these subjects. So it was really the teaching art history that really sparked in me this curiosity about the connections and wanting to bring this more to the foreground in my work. And I also, to be completely honest, drawing figures is probably the hardest, scariest thing for me in art. And so I felt ready to set myself up for a challenge to approach something that was deeply figurative and see what happened there. And on that note, I would say that I really made myself vulnerable to reveal that, a lack of skill or a naivety in my style. But that is also really important to me, because back as a student at Visa and starting to study illuminated manuscripts, I had this deep resentment that because of screens and capitalism and our lifestyle, we just don't get to have the same brains that people had in the Middle Ages. And we don't therefore get to make the artwork that they got to make. And so part of my leaving in some of the mess is a kind of rebellion, like I'm not going to try because I'm mad because I didn't get a chance. But it's also this idea of art history has got such a pretentious reputation for pretense, and art does too, that it's a pretentious world.
And when you think about perspective, I mean, it is an invention, and
Yeah,
that's what I find really interesting about going back into medieval art, like before they understood perspective, because we think it's just real, but it was invented. So
exactly. And the same
yeah.
thing with patriarchy, right? And
Yeah.
the same thing with a lot of our cultural values. So becoming aware of this ebb and flow in our civilization, and that even in the Middle Ages, so the fellow that I'm going to look at in my graduate research, he talks about in the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance, they dusted off old Greek and Roman stuff and brought back what he calls Roman law. And this was, again, this colonization of the indigenous, organic, qualitative way of living justly in community and superimposing a grid that's really sexy and efficient
Yeah.
that the Romans could come up with, that overprivileges the left side of our brains. And that's really what the West is constantly grappling with, right? Like we've gained strengths. There's something good about that, though, that type of rational, efficient thinking. You get a taxonomy of creatures and an economy and all sorts of things out of that. But it destroys the indigenous, qualitative, organically developed, matrilineal ways of being together and knowing things together.
Yes, but Jessica, why can't they live side by side?
And so that's what I'm trying for. Yeah. And again, to not just reject something because of one oppressive aspect of it, but to wrestle with it like you might wrestle with a parent, to make it good. Find out what's good.
One of the strengths, like for example, of this particular piece is the ambiguity. So are the columns these women holding up the building, or are they being held back by history?
Yes.
Are they trapped, or are they figures of strength? And I think that ambiguity talks about, your general idea, like that it's neither good nor bad. And I guess that's where Zen comes into play as well. Like it just is. So, I mean, of course we have to analyze history with a critical eye, but sometimes we don't want to lose sight of the positive.
Exactly.
So I mean, I've had people suggest that we shouldn't teach Western art history at all, that it's just not politically correct anymore. And you think, well, no, we have to look at it, but look at it in multiple ways.
Yeah, and I've encountered that. I went to a conference a year and a half ago in Vancouver, back when you could go to conferences, about teaching art history. And the rumor in the room was Yale has canceled their survey course. It was like the last bastion of the old way of doing things had crumbled. And no self-respecting institution will now be offering survey courses because that's so old school, whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel I've been thinking about it a lot as students ask for non-Western art. And I think, who am I to come and say, here's Chinese art, here's Buddhist art, and speak as an expert? Like, I can read some papers and I can report on the different motifs or iconography or historical events. But I'm starting to reject this idea that we can be objective. I think it's a Western fallacy and actually reproduces that colonialist mindset that we can rise above it all and leave our heritage and our baggage and our preoccupations behind and speak objectively about something. So John Ruskin was an influence on me in that as well, of owning your own heritage and speaking from that perspective, and that it will be imperfect and incomplete and ambiguous. But there's a deeper humility and a stronger groundedness, I think, in that approach.
Mhm. Now, does anyone else have questions? I don't want to take up all the space.
Hi, I do have a question, if that's okay. Can I
Sure.
go ahead?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I know that these sculptures were probably very decorated and very highly sort of colorful originally. I'm just wondering what you think about that, Jessica, because we have I mean, this whole idea of classical art is in a way just one version of this, right?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I haven't thought about it so much with these sculptures. I'm definitely allowing myself to be in the mistaken enlightenment camp that this is all beautiful white marble. Even my starting image of the John Ruskin drawing of rock, I was kind of saying, and these are stone, living stone, when yeah, they would have been garishly painted. So, you know, I think that just goes, it's another little stone on the weight towards a more playful approach to, you know, yeah, I think, you know, the Greeks, there's wonderful things that we get from the Greeks. The idea that contemplating art edifies the soul. I mean, wonderful. I mean, that's what my practice is built on. But yeah, I've just found it so fascinating to start reading more just last night about how these patriarchal culture superimposed itself over these matriarchal myths, and you still can detect that matriarchal value system in the Greek mythology. And so that animated the Caryatids even more for me last night, just thinking about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
I'd like to, I'm putting up my hand, but I know that you don't always get to see the screen to put people's hands up. So I'm just jumping in, but I also noticed that Matthew had been wanting to put his hand up for a while. So before I say something, do you mind if Matthew jumps in?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, well, just on this challenge you have in terms of the objective kind of versus the intimate, that seems to be like one of the themes you're playing along, particularly like when you talk about like the Minoan culture becoming subordinate to the patriarchal, like Plato implies. And just it seems that seems to be like a challenge, because like when you talk about like reviving Western culture, like being in Western culture, but that's also like the objectivity of Western culture is also what's enshrined in terms of the emphasis on reason that you get in classical Greece, and so that becomes like the abstraction there. So it's interesting that in your work you like the images are kind of ghostly, they haunt us, but they also like refer to the concrete and the enshrining of reason. And it's a neat interplay that your work shows, the struggle you're grappling with in both that affirming, but also like sort of a distance affirming of Western culture.
Yeah, well, you know, Wendy, I'm kind of quoting Wendy here, but there's always a paradox, right? And the paradox here is that part of my motivation is kind of like neoclassicism is bad. And then what is this project but in my own neoclassical phase? So I find that interesting also. There's I've been thinking about that in my Imagining the Sacred course. Is this, and the Greeks give it to us, this division between the mind and the body, or the spiritual world and the material world. It was a Greek idea that those things are separate. And in my Imagining the Sacred class, I just keep marveling at how every different culture we look at, how are they imagining the sacred? You crash right into the human body. The human body is always there at the center of sacred art. So I think that's another part here for me as someone who's been so cerebral in history and art theory, I'm starting to come around to the human body is kind of the beginning and end of all of it.
Go ahead, Cornelia.
Okay. When you were saying about maybe it's not a great idea to look at art history because of the legacy of patriarchy and classical ideas and the dominance of white or Mediterranean and white culture upon the rest of the world. But what's been fascinating to me about art history is that so much of what we learn through it challenges the very things that we think are foundational to Western civilization. And it's in art history that we find that. So if we don't look at art history, all we'll have is the history of military people or, you know, historians or technologies or anything that, you know, all kind of play into this sort of reason is all kind of thing, whereas art history tells us so much more. So I think there may be a case today that art history is more important than ever.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Excellent point.
Well, it's what people remember. Like if you ask people about the 19th century, nobody could name a major banker or industrialist, but people could name like artists. So it's actually what people end up remembering about culture. And it's ironic that it's so downplayed and, you know, it's the first thing to go in budget cuts. And yet it's how we define our culture. It's just, it's an ongoing frustration of mine.
Well, and it's just thrilling too. Like I researched this porch. I tried to find other images and I looked in art history books more about it. And I just got, you know, Phidias designed it. It's part of the Acropolis and maybe a little bit about Athena. But, you know, maybe there is a dissertation out there on this, but I remember in my undergrad in art history, it was a revelation that history, the practice of history now is to go into archives and find stuff that people knew, that people had written down and recorded for everyone's benefit. And it's still there, but we've forgotten. That just blew me away. Like I had that there's this middle layer of all that work's already been done and we just have to dust it off. Yeah, so I'm feeling that way about this porch. Like it's one of those bits of rubble that's been around and no one's actually dusted off. And yeah, so I feel a little bit evangelical about that in the sense, not in the denominational sense, but in the sharing the good news sense that art is there for us to bounce our ideas off of, you know, to play with, to stimulate us. And not for us to feel bashed over the head or inadequate in front of.
I just wanted to comment on the art image itself that you have up there right now, the contrast between the crumbling and the fragility and the strength, and how it almost does look illuminated. You were talking about illuminated manuscripts. So having the using the ink and the flow and the light bold contrasts of light and dark, for me, it illuminates, and I appreciate how fresh it is, direct and courageous, and yeah, and having the history behind enriches it too.
Oh, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
Thank you. It is an insecurity on my part that a lot's going on in my brain. I don't know how much is going on in the page if they match, you know. Thank you for that.
I think it's a pretty good match.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then at a certain point, you just accept the results of the day. This is what you have in you. And
yeah,
I don't think you need to be insecure about it now. Like you've really made the connection, I think, between what you're thinking about and the work. The work shows it. You might not see it, but it's there.
I think there's also the human body that has intelligence that
Mhm.
gets translated, and when we're using our hands and our eyes together.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Yeah. Yeah. That doing a drawing about this, I'm using my body and applying that intelligence. And I wouldn't be getting the benefit of that if I wrote an essay about this.
No, that's true.
Yeah, and I'm connecting to these women that are enshrined here by using my body to make that artwork.
Well, I know in my experience of drawing the figure is that I just intuitively reference my own body as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's my comment.
I would just like to say something.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just really, I want to applaud and encourage you, Jessica, your commitment and your devotion to following this thread that you've stumbled upon through to completion, to a status of a new vision. I just really applaud that.
Oh, thank you.
So often, art is just kind of a knee-jerk reflection or knee-jerk reaction to to current things. But what you've done is you found this thread that is such a firm connection between the past and the present, and I really applaud that. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
And along the way, you've thrown in some beautiful drawing.
Thank you. Well, you know, the artist perspective, the insider perspective on this show is that I started a new journal sketchbook today with my notes for this talk, because while the show's kind of conceived as an end point, I'm feeling now that it's the beginning point for something.
That's good, yeah. So any other questions?
I just wanted to thank Jessica. I was very excited when I saw your series. I'm a big fan of your drawing and artwork anyways. And I did the History of Western Art full year course back in the early 80s. And what was called then to me the Temple of Athena Nike with the Caryatids always appealed to me. But actually the Minoan culture is what caught my fancy. And this third time trying, I should be traveling to Crete in next year in May for an artist residency, which will be drawing stuff, and I find drawing far more challenging than painting. And I'm going to be spending a week before that in Athens before I go over to Heraklion. And I will go up there and draw this. Not photo, I will draw it.
Sounds great, Mary.
Take a picture too.
Yeah, back up.
I might commission some photography from you, because you know, everyone I couldn't find any close-up images of the statues. Everyone wants to get kind of the whole scene. And so, yeah.
I'll get those for free for you, for free. I'll do them because I'll be photographing as backup, as you say. But also the Minoan, I'll be going to the Palace of Knossos. It's one of the first things I'm visiting. So you got it.
Cool.
That's great.
We'll have to keep in touch, Mary. It's really good to see you.
You too.
Well, thanks so much, Jessica. That was really wonderful. So great to have the art history and your work combined. You did an amazing job. So thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out. I appreciate deeply you coming out to hear me speak and also spending time on a screen in this beautiful Saturday. So I really look forward to, as I said, I hope this conversation continues on all these threads with each of you.
Yeah, and don't forget to check out slideroomgallery.com where you can see Jessica's work, and there's pieces for sale, so don't hesitate to purchase one.
And if you want to study art history with me, in July and August, I'll be offering a course on 19th century art, Romanticism and Realism. So that will get William Blake and the Impressionists and everyone in between. And then also one on the 60s on minimalism and process art and all of that. So we're finding that the 2-hour Zoom art history courses fly by and they're really fun. So.
Oh, that sounds great, Jessica.
Yes, Susan, we'll register you right now. No, and people give rave reviews for Jessica's art history course. And I think in part, it's because you have such a love for art as well as history. So that's great. Okay, well, thanks everyone. And hope to see you at our new visa. We move on Friday. And so anytime after June 1st, if you want to visit us, do.
Wonderful.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Everyone for coming. It's wonderful to see each of you.
Okay. Bye.